When talking about scatter plots here in Unit 5, the three major components we're trying to identify and describe in these scatter plots are form, direction, and strength. Now all of these are relative form, relative direction, relative strength. In terms of form, we have linear and non-linear. We don't want to go into the quadratic, cubic. We don't want to go into that type of form. All we're caring about is linear versus something that is non-linear. Direction, we're looking at positive versus a negative direction. And then strength, we're looking at strong, moderate, or weak. Whenever we talk about form and linear, linear is based on this direction here. When we see that direction, if that direction is constantly going in one direction, it's constantly going positive or it's constantly going negative, then we know that our form is linear. I've had several students over the past several years that have said this is non-linear because the strength of the graph was weak. However, whenever they described the direction, they always said it was positive or negative. They never said it was positive for part of it and then negative for the other part, making it non-linear. They always gave me positive or negative. They would describe non-linear based on the strength because they were far apart from that best fit line. So always make sure their form is dependent upon the direction. Now whenever we have direction, if that direction does curve, if it starts to go positive for a certain interval and then negative for another interval, then we have a non-linear form of a scatter plot. Whenever you have non-linear form, direction is relatively irrelevant. Now, I like to have my kids identify the intervals that are positive and the intervals that are negative. However, that's not necessary if it's non-linear, because they should be able to see that it has not one single direction. And then strength, I always like to draw a trend line or an approximated trend line for the scatter plot to show the strength and show how close to that line the dots are or the points are and how far apart they are, giving us our strong, moderate, or weak description. When looking at this scatter plot here, the basic way that I approach this is again asking them form, direction, or strength. You can start here with direction if you'd like to. You notice everything's going in a positive direction. If you were to draw a trend line or a best fit line, that trend line would continuously go in the positive direction. So this is a positive scatter plot. Also, because it's positive, then we know that the form is linear. And then we look at how closely aligned the points are to that trend line. Now my trend line isn't exact, I haven't calculated it and graphed it, but it is basically through the middle of all the points. Now for me, this would go somewhere between strong and moderate. I would probably tend to say moderate because more of the points are fairly distant from that trend line. However, if a student can argue that it's strong because of another graph that would be moderate, then I always like to allow that dialogue and give them credit for something like that. Counterpart to the example we just had, this graph here, this scatter plot, if you take a look at the direction, you will notice that it is going positive in this first section of graph, and then it's going negative in the second section. Now the trend line I just drew isn't very good. However, if I was to draw one continuous line, I could get something fairly close to it, but we have an interval where it's positive and an interval where it's negative, so this would be a non-linear graph or a non-linear scatter plot. And then again, you can determine the strength and the direction and the form. I have my kids say it's positive from A to B and then negative from B to C. And then also the strength here, again, I would say moderate to this one, but if a student can come to me and justify and have a dialogue that says it's strong compared to another one, then I always like to award credit for that. And that is scatter plots.